Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Honor to him, the Blessed One, the Worthy One, the fully enlightened one. My utmost respect to the perfectly enlightened Samma Sambuddha, the noble doctrine of the Buddha, and the noble Mahasangha, the disciples of the Buddha. Hello, dear Dhamma friends. Welcome to the lecture 3 of our guest lecture series. Under this weekly guest lecture series, we will cover up more current and modern topics related to Buddhism to help benefit our community around the world. I certainly believe this effort by DHAMMA USA is going to help the community to apply Buddhist teachings in a more practical level. Today we have invited another distinguished scholar and personal friend of mine to this special guest lecture series. Dear friend, let me introduce our guest, Dr. Richard Dixey today, who has kindly accepted our invitation to talk about emotional resilience.
So,
Hello, Dr.
Bandy, thank you so much for your invitation. Forgive me, I'm sharing my screen, so I can't see you.
Yeah.
I guess you can only just hear me. You can't see me either. Is that right?
All
Just,
right. So
yeah.
today we have invited this uh, special guest lecture, Dr. Richard Dixey today. So, actually, I want to introduce him first. Dr. Richard Dixey holds a PhD and MSc from London University and a BA from Oxford University, following 14 years as the director of the bioelectronic research unit in London. He founded Phytopharm plc, a company listed on the London Stock Exchange that developed Western pharmaceuticals based on traditional medicines, and acted as its chief executive from 1993 to 2007. Since 1972, through his interest in Buddhism, he has worked on the interface between scientific and spiritual perspectives and has traveled extensively in the Himalayas, in India, and Southeast Asia. He and his wife, Wang Mo, who is the eldest daughter of Tartan Tulku Rinpoche, are co-directors of the Light of Buddha Dharma Foundation International, which is dedicated to the rebuilding of the Buddhist culture of India. He is also on the faculty of Dharma College in Berkeley and is an advisor to the Kensei Foundation. So let me at the very outset express my gratitude and thankful blessing to Dr. Richard Dixey for accepting our invitation in such a short notice to contribute towards a special guest lecture series. I met Dr. Dixey in Berkeley recently when I visited Dharma College after a while, and we truly had a very fruitful conversation. A very good evening and greeting Dr. Dixey, and we warmly welcome you to this special guest lecture series on behalf of Dhamma USA. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing fine, thank you, Bandir. Nice to hear you.
All right. So, Dr. Dixey, I remember when I visited Dharma College last time, when you hosted the first ever Tripitaka chanting ceremony in USA way back in 2014. I just arrived in University of the West actually that time. So Mangalam Center and Dharma College were jointly organizing this amazing ceremony, and I'm so fortunate that I was able to attend that auspicious event. I know we met quite a few times back in India and also in Sri Lanka, right? Um, but when I visited this time, I noticed the Dharma College has transformed into a really different place. You offer a number of courses, they are mostly for free, and the classrooms are really well equipped. And I was really impressed with the amazing shrine room, and I enjoyed some time at the meditation room as well. Wow. One would be wondering how you maintain such a serene place in the middle of that bustling city. Would you like to say a few words, Dr. Dixey, about the Dharma College and your involvement in that wonderful institute, please, before we start your
Yes,
comment, please?
indeed. My first slide is about Dharma College.
Okay.
And just briefly, as Banti said, we're very fortunate to have a huge building, 35,000 square feet, in downtown Berkeley, right beside the city library. So it's in the middle of the city of Berkeley, which, as many of you may know, is the home of the most famous university, Berkeley University. And our college was founded in 2012, and we have 10 full-time faculty. We've enrolled over 3,000 students in 109 courses in the last 2 years.
Wow.
And we offer 5 6-week terms a year. And we have a worldwide membership, largely on an online community portal through Zoom. So we're very fortunate to be able to offer Buddhist teachings. But our whole mission is to reimagine wisdom. That's to say, to present Buddhist teachings in contemporary culture, because we feel that some of the problems, I think, that contemporary culture suffers from are directly addressed by Buddha's teachings. But it's important that we're able to couch and express those teachings in modern language without necessarily using the traditional language of Pali or Sanskrit, or even the traditional blessings and those sorts of things. We are Buddhists ourselves, but we're interested in appealing out to anybody who's in contemporary culture. And of course, contemporary culture is completely worldwide. So really, everywhere you go in the world where people are educated in a modern manner, you have contemporary culture and much of the same problems to do with alienation and the lack of meaning. And we feel very strongly that the Buddha's teachings are absolutely appropriate for the current circumstance. So that's what we've dedicated the college to do. And all the courses we offer are like that. So thank you, Banti, for giving me the lead to say that
Right.
and give you my first slide.
Thank you so much. Dear Dhamma friends, I'm sure you will be very interested in today's topic by Dr. Dixie. It is emotional resilience. Let's see what Dr. Dixie has to offer today in defending this interesting topic in a world where we have almost been disturbed in so many ways. I'm sure this emotional resilience will be a topic, a theme that can help benefit many of uh, people around the world. So please mark your calendar every Thursday at 6 p.m. Pacific time to get more benefit from this guest lecture series. Kindly check with Dhamma USA YouTube channel and Facebook page for more updates. Okay, over to you, Dr. Dixie.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So, I'm going to go back to my first slide because in many ways, the key to emotional resilience is in this very, very famous quote from the Blessed One, where he met a deva who said, I've traveled the whole cosmos looking for enlightenment. Where is it to be found? And of course, in many ways, emotional resilience is all to do with finding peace of mind and the true path. And the answer the Buddha gave was very interesting. He said, in this very 1 fathom long body, along with perception and thoughts, I proclaim the world, the origin of the world, the cessation of the world, and the path leading to the end of the world. That's to say, the solution to our problems isn't really external to us, it's internal. And I want to talk today about the very well-known Buddhist systems of mental development, but do so very much in contemporary manner, addressing it from a contemporary perspective to hopefully introduce some of these ideas in a new way. And so with those thoughts, I want to really just begin with this very simple statement. Why does meditation lead to resilience? Well, meditation leads to resilience because through understanding the nature of our minds, we can become resilient to problems because we understand them. But of course, in order to understand the nature of our minds, we have to undertake mental development. And there are two great traditions of mental development that we have, which come from the languages of Pali and Sanskrit. There were actually many more in ancient India, but they've been lost, and all we're left with is two great canonical traditions, the Pali tradition, the Sanskrit tradition. And these lineages were prominent in India for over 1,000 years, 1,200 years really, and still have a major role to play in Southeast Asia. And there is an absolutely huge literature on mental development in the Buddhist world. Indeed, the Buddhist literature is so great that there are more Buddhist commentaries than the rest of the world's religions combined. It is literally vast. And there are also thousands and thousands and thousands of Buddhist sites, particularly in India. In the state of Bihar alone, which is where Bodh Gaya is, where the Buddha was enlightened, there are over 12,000 Buddhist sites, for example. First universities were developed in the Buddhist world, and critical philosophy was developed in the Buddhist world as well. So really almost everything you can think about in terms of the Buddha Dharma was developed in this extraordinary medieval culture. Well, okay, so what's the difference between the philosophy of a medieval monk in Nalanda or somewhere and a modern philosopher? It's this. The scholar monks developed a full understanding of experience from a first-person perspective, unlike modern philosophers that talk in the third person and talk in terms of logical categories, but never base that in their own experience. So this is a fundamental difference of approach and something extremely important to understand. So I'm going to address this issue directly today. Now, of course, there are two types of Buddhist meditation, and these run through every tradition. There's calmness meditation, so-called shamatha, and there's insight or clear-seeing meditation called vipassana. And both of these lead to mindfulness, which is embodied awareness. And people who embody awareness become resilient. Essentially, resilience is a function of being able to operate with awareness even in the face of difficulty. And what tends to happen to us is when things go wrong, we lose our awareness. We become angry, we become disjointed, we become upset. And in that process, we lose our ability to react to actual events. So the key is mindfulness itself. But what do we mean by, what are we required to be mindful of? This is the question. And here I want to talk about what I think you can call a fruitful meditation object. That's to say, if we could identify something in our cognition, which was a key for us to be mindful of, we would be able to become resilient very quickly. And this is what the talk will be about today. So just to reiterate this point, we cannot know anything outside our mind. We cannot know anything outside our mind. Now, we talk about the world. We talk about the all the time in front of things. We talk about things in our world. But when we actually look more carefully, when we make these statements, we realize that all these statements happen to us in our mind. That's to say, this term, the world, is an inference about something external to us, which we generate from our own sense impressions. And the only direct knowledge we have comes to us through our sense impressions, the famous 5 senses, and of course, the gate of the mind, thoughts. And there's no other direct experience we can have ever, not just some of the time, ever. And this is a real key to the Buddha's teaching, because the Buddha pointed this out 2,500 years ago. In this very 1 fathom body of man lies everything. There's nothing we can know outside our mind. And although we have this idea that we're somehow discovering the truth of the universe or something, the truth is that all of these ideas are inferential. They're not directly known by us. So what can we know about our own mind? This must be the question that all meditators have to address. Now, the key here is sometimes expressed as the mind-body problem, because we have a body and we have lots of information about our body, and we now have increasing scientific insight into how the body works and everything. But is that going to tell us anything about our minds? And the answer is no, it isn't. So although there are thousands of books on the bookshelves written by famous professors of neurophysiology, etc., talking about the mind, on the whole, what they say is not directly relevant. And the reason for this was expressed very elegantly by a philosopher called Thomas Nagel, a picture of him in the bottom right there. And he said something very simple. He said, look, let's take a bat. You can write encyclopedias on bat physiology, bat zoology, bat psychology, bat environment, bat diet, bat anything you like. You can write thousands and thousands of pages, but you're only going to know what it's like to be a bat if you are a bat. There's no other way to know what it's like to be a bat. Well, in exactly the same way, if we're to develop resilience, we have to know what it's like to be me. We have to understand what our actual experience is, because it's in that actual experience that resilience resides. So what can we say about our mental states? Well, the first thing that's important to say is that mental states are not necessarily conscious. Actually, the idea that we have to be conscious of everything is a complete misunderstanding of our experience. If we knew what we were doing, we'd be bad at it. Why do I say that? It's very simple. Learning is forgetting. Actually, if you learn how to drive a car or play an instrument or learn a language, when you begin, you're very, very aware, you're very conscious of everything you're doing, and you're doing it very badly. And what happens as you begin to learn a skill is you begin to forget what you're doing and express the skill. This is a really important thing to understand. So you could well say that the result of learning is abandoning experience in favor of a map. What we do is we generate knowledge of what will occur, and then we no longer are fully aware of every single movement we're making. We're now in a map of what we're doing. And that's why someone can pick up an instrument and play a beautiful piece of music without thinking where their fingers are on the neck of the instrument or where their fingers are plucking the string. In exactly the same way, we can't ask what the mind is by looking around the back as if we'll find the wires or something, because the mind we're referring to is our very ability to know itself. How can we know knowing itself? If we knew knowing itself and became mindful of knowing itself, we will get closer to understanding what the mind is and hence generate emotional resilience. And the key to this is to find what I like to call chinks in the display, little gaps. Now we have this seamless display of experience within which we live, which we call the world. But of course, when you think about it, it's not really a world. It's a display given to us by our senses and thoughts. And the key is, can we find a way of penetrating that seemingly completely continuous display to see how it's made, perhaps to find out how it's generated? And one of the keys is to look at words. Now, words are very, very interesting because world construction requires words. Now, this has been true in every great culture has a creation myth, and every cultural myth starts with words. In fact, the English word spelling is exactly the same word as one uses for a magic spell to bring something into being. And of course, nowadays, we're all on our mobile phones talking away. But if you were to go back 30 years and look at someone walking along the street, you'd see people either talking to each other or talking to themselves. We're using words all the time. And if we could understand why we use words all the time, we might be able to come to a fruitful meditation object. And there's actually quite interesting psychology on this. This is a very interesting publication, for example. I've highlighted the bit I wanted to talk about. Verbal labels can change ongoing perceptual processing. For example, actually hearing the word chair compared to simply thinking about a chair can temporarily make the visual system a better chair detector. That's to say, they did a very simple experiment. They showed people photographs with chairs in them hidden in various ways. And in one set, they said, just look. In the other, they said, say the word chair, 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 chair. And sure enough, when people said the word chair, they found more chairs hidden than when they didn't. Now, this is exactly why when we lose our car keys or lose some possession, we walk around going, where are my car keys? Where are my car keys? What we're doing is we're using words to guide our perception. This is an extremely important recognition. And of course, the reverse is also true. Here's a very famous cartoon of someone who's had too much to drink, who's lost his car keys. And what he does is he looks for his car keys under a street lamp. And when a policeman comes and says, why are you looking for your car keys under a street lamp? He says, that's the only place I can see. Well, in exactly the same way, because words help us see, we think all there is words. But that's not necessarily true at all. And here again, we're beginning to gain insight into a meditation object. Now, of course, we're educated to build a dictionary of the world with words. And here's an extract from probably a grade 3, 4 to 5-year-old book, which names sense percepts as things. So we have an orange chair. There's an orange object there, and children learn that that object that they see is called chair, or they see the ball and they go, there's a ball, table, bag, bicycle, wall clock. And of course, what's so interesting is through the open door, they're the rolling fields of the world, i.e., we are ascribing labels, we are labeling our experience in words and hence making a map of what we're doing. Now, here's a quote from a remarkable book about this called Revelations of Mind, written by my father-in-law, Tartang Rinpoche, this is a remarkable book. I wrote a commentary on it called Searcher Reaches Land's Limits. But here's the quote: strengthened by usage into words and concepts, labels merge into the structure of our language and gain certainty through repetition. That's to say, as young children, we learn words by repeating them. And gradually, when all our friends use the same words, we create a world map as if it were real. But actually what we're doing is we're labeling percepts. The percepts are real. The words are merely labels. But in this process, these words, become the content of our thoughts that engage and re-engage our perceptual processes while accumulating additional nuances of meaning. Networks of associations develop that can then be activated instantly by the sound of a label, by that word. Mind continues to affirm their reality throughout our lives. And this is literally true. So as we get older, we generate more and more words, and those words have more and more associations. And so our sense of reality becomes very fixed in a labeled up experience. Now, I want to show you where this actually happens, because this actually happens in time. Now, we know about reaction time. Here's an example of a snake and a mongoose, and many of you may know that mongoose have quicker reactions than snakes. So they can actually kill snakes because they can bite a snake before a snake can bite a mongoose. Well, in exactly the same way, human beings have slower reaction times than snakes. So snakes will bite you before you can pull your hand away. There is a lag between our experience and the actuality of the world. And this lag can actually be measured. And this is a real key to understanding a fruitful meditation object. Here, for example, is a very simple experiment. On the left is a pattern, which when you turn it round on the right, becomes a face. And you can see that the pattern's just a pattern, doesn't look like a face because it's upside down. When you put it the right way up, oh my gosh, it's a face. Now you can actually measure this in a really beautiful experiment that was published in Nature. Here we have a set of scans. On the top row, it's an EEG, this is an electroencephalogram. On the top row, they show a subject the face the right way up, and they're measuring activation in the brain as the brain processes the image. And you can see at 150 milliseconds, there's nothing. So we don't even react to events until at least a finger click has gone past. Then at about 380 milliseconds, there is a reaction. At 540 milliseconds, there's a big reaction. And then by 720 milliseconds, it's over. On the bottom is the face the other way up. Here we see no reaction at 150 milliseconds, activation at 380 milliseconds, but no activation at 540 milliseconds. What this shows is that recognition takes time. In the upper set of traces, the subjects are recognizing a face. Oh, that's a face. That takes nearly half a second. So when you look around the room you're in and you recognize the objects on your desk or around on the walls, you need to know that this is actually happening a long time after you saw those objects. It's about 2 finger clicks, maybe even 3 finger clicks before recognition occurs. But why don't we know this? Why don't we recognize this in our own experience? It's because of this. The first line says, consciousness of input does not arise until at least 200 milliseconds after stimuli arrive. And that's what you can see here. At 150 milliseconds, there's no activation. At 380 milliseconds, there is activation. So it takes about 200 milliseconds before cognition occurs. But they go on to say another 200 milliseconds are required to allow recognition. And the reason we don't realize it is because the brain compensates for its own processing time in the representations of input that it constructs. So although we think we live in the here and now, we don't. We live about half a second behind the here and now. And you might ask, well, how can I pick something up? How can I do anything in the world? It's because we move to pick things up before we know we're doing it. And as a result, we get the impression that we're in the present all the time. But in fact, we're not. We're about 2 finger clicks behind the present at all time. Now, I want to show a little movie which shows this really graphically. This is actually not an experiment. This is just a record of some chap walking along who was nearly hit by lightning. And it was taken on a security camera. And he's walking at about 2 steps a second. So each step is half a second. Let's see what happens when we run this movie. Oh, I've just got to do this. Let's hope I can. Okay, good. Okay, so we're going to run this movie. Here he goes, walking along. Bang, there's a lightning flash. And then he reacts. Now let's slow this down a bit. Here's walking 2 steps a second. There's the lightning flash. And then he reacts. Now, what's interesting about this is if we stop this movie, as I'm going to do when we repeat it. So let's have a look at what actually happens in the real world. So let's wait for it to get there. Here he is walking along. Bang. There is the present moment. There is a lightning flash that's whited out the camera, that's hitting the ground. But see what happens. He takes another whole step. Now, this man has been hit by lightning, but he's taken a whole step before he reacts. And then he reacts. You can see it takes him a whole step before he knows he's been hit by lightning. Now, this is being hit by lightning. This is not some small thing. And it's about half a second before he reacts. Now, I'd like to put it to you that within this half a second, is the whole of religion, the whole of psychology, the whole of culture, the whole of meditation, the whole of our human experience. We are constructing the world in that half second. And what we need to do is to find a way of making it a meditation object. This is the key. Now, to go back to quotes from Revelations of Mind, you could call this linkage of labeling and experience a regime, like a kind of political system. It's like a construct. And here's the quote: as king of our being, mind projects its power through operations that administer and coordinate all of our mental and physical functions. And you can call these things operating as awareness or consciousness or perception or through other processes called by other names. But mind collects and distills input from the senses. It cognizes, identifies, and recognizes. And in our language, we have this extraordinary word, recognize. And that's what takes half a second. Cognition takes about 200 milliseconds. And in the next 200 milliseconds, a process of identification and recognition occurs, i.e., we ascribe a label. The problem is, having ascribed that label, the label then acts as an anchor for all the associations and meanings and prejudices and problems that we can imagine that attach to it. It goes on to say this: it confirms and reconfirms what has been identified and recognized. It labels and spells out the meaning of everything we find conceivable. It points out and interprets meanings and then announces it properly in a language we can understand. Together, these operations of mind set up a powerful regime that controls the nature of our experience from moment to moment. So if we're going to become resilient, we have to understand the regime of mind. And we need to understand how cognition leads to recognition, because this is why we're never at peace. Things come up in our experience. If we've experienced them before, all the memories of what we experienced before flood into our consciousness. And as a result, we can become agitated and worried about things that shouldn't worry us in themselves. They do because of the way association works. Here's the quote: when mind becomes agitated, pressure builds up and thoughts demand some sort of action. While one part of mind has a powerful urge to move on, a second may insist on resolution, struggling with contradictory thoughts and feelings that flash back and forth. We can find ourselves at the center of a situation that's difficult to control. Once mind is caught up in this dynamic, its energy accelerates so strongly we may be unable to stop or change its direction. If we could control our recognitive loop, we could cut why we are never at peace and find stability that we never knew was there. And to do this, we have to literally start what I like to call a dance with our own cognition. We need to understand that mind is reading back what mind presents. There's a loop. We can understand that mind is reading what mind presents. We know that mind is interpreting, then receiving back its own interpretations, which are once again presented, expanded, received back, reinterpreted. If this insight arises in contemplation, it may indicate that we're becoming aware of the closed circuitry that governs the operation of mind. Now, this is a fundamental teaching of the Buddha, and it can be really easily expressed in four. Of course, famously, this is the 12 links of dependent origination. But here, I've expressed it in four. We grasp impressions. This is cognitive apprehension. We're apprehending impressions. We then cling to what they mean. That's recognition. So impressions occur. We then make a world of them. Then we act, and the actions have consequences. And those consequences color our impressions and consequently affect what they mean. So our actions are conditioned, and so our consequences get deeper and deeper. And that is the mind loop that creates what in Buddhism is called samsara. And if we could understand why it's a loop and where we could cut that loop, we would have a path out. And in every canonical presentation of the 12 links of dependent origination, it is cut between grasping and clinging. You grasp at impressions and you cut there before you ascribe to them what they mean. If one could identify that recognitive loop, one would find a path to peace. So this is why meditation leads to resilience. Percepts arise at each of the sense gates. The first step is to overcome reflexive reactivity. That's to say, our habit of just immediately responding without any control. This is the path of shamatha. And what shamatha does is calm down reflexive reactivity so we can begin to see it. And once a base of shamatha has been achieved, clear seeing, vipassana, is possible. And in many ways, vipassana is not a separate meditation technique. It's a fruit of shamatha. We see clearly because we've become calm. If you like, insight arises from concentration. The key is to see clearly the transition from cognition to recognition, because that is the moment where the whole world is made. And this is why the Blessed One said, in this very 1 fathom long body, along with perception and thought, I proclaim the world, the origin of the world, the cessation of the world, and the path leading to the end of the world. And so this is why, and here's some information for those of you who might be interested. This is Thomas Nagel, this wonderful philosopher, wrote a wonderful book called Mortal Questions, one of which is What It's Like to Be a Bat, which was published in 1979. Tartan Rinpoche wrote his masterwork, Revelations of Mind, published in 2013. I wrote a commentary on it called Searcher Reaches Land's Limits, which was published in 2020. And if you want information about Dharma College, it's very simple. Just look up www.dharma-college.com, and all our classes and activities are listed there. And so with that, thank you very much for your attention. I hope that was helpful. And if we have time, I'd be happy to answer questions, but I don't know what time we have. So I'm just going to stop sharing, I think, and hopefully I will turn up. There, I have. And here's Bhante. Thank you, Bhante. I can't hear you now, but...
All right.
There.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Dixey, for this wonderful speech on emotional resilience. I'm sure our audience must have enjoyed this speech with the beautiful presentation on emotional resilience. Dr. Dixey, you talk about the emotional resilience, and I also noticed that you were talking about the simile of that lightning and how fast the mind actually reacts to that situation. In Abhidhamma, I remember we also have so many steps of the chitta viti, what we call, so many steps of the mind. And the fastest thing actually is not the body but the mind. Then you also demonstrated today that the lightning striking was much faster than the human reaction to that. Would you like to elaborate that thing a little bit, like about the emotional resilience as we have seen, we have heard in Buddhism, and also why is it not so reactive to that situation over there?
Okay, so of course you're completely correct. The Chitta Vritti is a remarkable example of meditative insight, seeing the process of cognition occurring, which we can now confirm using modern techniques of electroencephalograms. So there is actually a confluence happening between the ancient meditation insights and modern scientific insights. Very, very interesting time we live in. And the key is this: we live in an illusion that's constructed by our cognition that gives us a display of a real world as if we're in it right now. But we're not. The display that we receive is a construct. It's constructed from our senses. And indeed, one of the things I do when I talk about this in more depth is I talk about optical illusions. And optical illusions are a good example where you can show that we are constructing a model of the world. And with the right illusions, the model breaks down and you get these strange things that you can't explain. And this is because our cognition is constructing a map for us. So that's the first level of illusion. But much more important is the second. We're not in the present. We can never be truly in the present. But in that half second, that 2 finger clicks that happens between events and our reaction to them, is this key process of labeling and recognition. And this is the process that we need to understand, because that's where we can break clinging to our cognitions as if they were real, and hence become free of them. So emotional resilience is the ability to deal with obstacles without abreacting to them. Now, if you're non-resilient, when something goes wrong, you immediately react, get angry or whatever. You immediately have an abreaction. Whereas someone who's emotionally resilient assesses the situation and acts appropriately. That's to say, they're not reacting in a completely random way. Now, this is not to say that they're dead to problems. So some people say, oh, if I could just have no thought, if I could take my shamatha into no thought, like a piece of wood, I would be emotionally resilient. No, you'd just be unresponsive. Actually, emotional resilience is responsiveness guided by wisdom. And in order to achieve it, one needs to achieve clear seeing of the regime of mind. And once we see clearly how our labeling works, we're able to accept the label as a possibility and meanwhile think about other things that might be of interest too. And this enables us to make good choices and hence become emotionally resilient. So the process of labeling is an extremely important element of our cognitive structure. And one of the most important labels we need to understand is this one: I've got a problem. I've got a problem. I've got a problem. The moment we use the word problem, all those associations about problems appear, and we've got a problem. We're not resilient. Whereas what someone who is resilient will do is say, there is a problem here. I see it's not going the way I expect, and then have the time and the flexibility to develop an appropriate response to it. This arises as a direct consequence of insight. And it's one of the great Buddhist teachings. And it's one of the things that separates Buddhism from theistic religions, where you just pray to a god in the hope the problem's going to go away, because you've not developed any skill in yourself to deal with it. And of course, in modern conditions, when we look at the polarization and we look at the incredibly unfortunate events that are unfolding in current circumstances, we can see that many of these are due to a lack of emotional resilience. If we could develop emotional resilience, for example, if politicians could be allowed to make mistakes and apologize for them, instead of pretending they never make a mistake, as if they never did anything wrong ever, if they could have the permission to show, yes, I got that wrong, we could move forward with right choices rather than living in a fantasy world where politicians pretend to get everything right the whole time while conditions are getting steadily more difficult. And it seems to me there's a very good example of where emotional resilience could have a big impact.
Oh, thank you so much. I think this will be very helpful to many, like as you mentioned, like not only the politicians but also to other people who are really busy in their day-to-day mundane activities. But most of the time, Dr. Dixie, are we not actually living in the future or at the present, in the past most of the time, right? I
Well,
noticed like
we're
most of
living
the
in a
time
map.
either dream about the future, or they worry about the past, but they are actually missing that very present moment today, right here, right now.
Yeah, well, okay. So technically, we're living in a representation, a map. So our brain develops a map of our experience based upon inputs from our senses. That's technically what's occurring. And it takes about half a second. So when we look around the room we're in and we can recognize everything in it, we need to know that that map is generated moment to moment to moment. In fact, it's generated at about 8 times a second. It's refreshed.
Mhm.
So we're living in this continual refreshing map of actuality. The problem is, in that map is all our memories, all the bad things that happen to us, all our education, all the good things that happen to us, all our opinions or our prejudices. Everything is in that map. If we're unconscious of that map, then we act as if it is real. And consequently, we go round and round and round in circles because that map is actually historical. It's made from what happened to us, what we learned in the past. And so we go like this, round and round and round and round and round in circles. What we have to do is to see the map as an alternative, whereas there's another thing we could do, which is directly respond to what is arising. Now, we only have that choice if the map becomes visible. If the map is invisible, we can never respond to circumstance. We always respond to the map. And this is the problem. And so overcoming this problem is to enter a path of wisdom where we find alternatives that lie outside the map,
Mhm.
outside what we expect, outside what is normal. And that, of course, is very much the Blessed One's teaching. We need to look beyond our ordinary experience. And it's not that it lies somewhere else, it lies in us. In that half second where the map is made is where freedom from the map is possible. It's not anywhere else. So there's no location for a map-free experience except for in our own moment to moment to moment cognition. So I like to say that liberation is this far from our face at all times. And that's why we can't see it, because we're seeing through it and saying, there's the world. But actually, the world that we see is a map. It's not the real thing. And that's my understanding.
Yeah, I think many of us are actually living in just a fantasy world, a dream world, where we don't really see the reality, true reality, fabricated things. This is our body. This is me, me, myself. And I remember, like the Buddha said in Samyutta Nikaya, Devata Samyutta, um, like. Many people are just wondering, or they are actually when one deva, actually a celestial being, met a monk, he asked this question: how come you are so pleasant, and you are in the jungle with least amount of facilities, but you look so peaceful and serene? How come you are so privileged to enjoy such peaceful, serene look? And the monk said, I don't live in the past, I don't live in the future, I live today, right here, right now.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it is really important that we isn't it, Dr. Richard, that the meditation is all about not jumping into past or future, but um, living at the present moment.
Yes, but I think I would say to you, by all means, but what do you mean by the present moment? The problem is there's been a failure of analysis, I think, in many traditions of meditation where the present moment isn't properly explained. We don't live in the present moment, actually. We can't. And what's happening is we're beginning to see that we actually live significantly behind the present moment in a representation of the present moment. And what meditation does, if it's properly conducted, is it leads to a more immediate freedom from that representation. And of course, whether we're doing it by following sensations, which is a very commonly used meditation object, by following, say, the sensation, like the sensation of the breath or the sensation in the body, we gradually wear out the map of that sensation into the actuality of it. And what we're doing is we're bringing our awareness forward from the map to the actuality of the sensation itself. And that's why it causes emotional resilience and cognitive freedom. That's technically what's happening. So understanding that's important, because sometimes meditators think they can be here now, and they have this injunction to be here now. But actually, this is a misunderstanding. It's not that we need to be here now. What we need to do is be free of the map we have of being here now. That's the key, i.e., we can't have a destination of being here now, because that's just another map. It's about being free of maps themselves that is the key. And you could say that's taking nirvana as a meditation object. You could say that's going beyond the concept of meditation itself. But the reason why we need to do it is because otherwise we're caught up all the time with a map that's covering our eyes, and we're not able to see what lies beyond. And so we don't see clearly. And so we get caught up and travel in samsara.
I think we have a question from Judy regarding the map. So the only way to actually see that map is through meditation and following the teachings.
Actually, not really. You know, it's interesting this. Of course, meditation is the way to do it systematically. But actually, if you have a shock, just for a moment, you're map free. And indeed, extreme sports are a really good example of this. People go bungee jumping off bridges, or they go paragliding. They do all these very dangerous things. And the reason they do these things is because the adrenaline rush of doing some extreme sport blows their map away. And just for a brief moment, they're free. And they come away from these experiences exhilarated and feeling free. And then slowly the map readjusts itself and they're back in the prison again. So we can have fleeting experiences of being map free. But if we're going to systematically become free of the map, then indeed meditation is the path. And there is no other, because we need to systematically explore freedom from it. And the difference is like this, you know, in the night, there might be a lightning flash, and just for a minute, you see the landscape, and then it's gone. Whereas meditations like the dawn, if you're concentrating and generating awareness of map making, slowly the light comes up more and more, steadily, steadily, steadily. And that's the difference. So we can have fleeting experience without question, and we always do. Many of the reasons why we like extreme experiences, we like thrills, we like noise, we like excitement, is because for brief moments we become map free, and then we fall back into it again. And that's why we find it exhilarating to do these things.
That's right. Like even in the jhanas, you actually see the light briefly for a short time, and then you are so inspired. And it is also said like attaining sotapanna is like seeing the nibbana in a fraction of a second, and you are so inspired to go ahead, go forward, and achieve more magga phalas. Right. So we have another question, Dr. Richard, from Luna Win. How can we control our mindset to control the emotions and to protect the bad feelings and some reaction from someone?
Okay, so what I'm suggesting is we don't. What we do is see how these emotions arise. Now, emotions are all associations. They are associations that attach to recognitions. Until you recognize your enemy, you don't have any emotion about your enemy. Only when you recognize your enemy do you then remember that he or she is your enemy. So the key is to see that recognitive event. If you can see that event, you can cut at the root emotionality. All emotions are learned. No emotion is primary. They arise by association from labeled percepts. So in developing vipassana, we cut through emotionality, not by suppressing it and not by providing an antidote to it, but by seeing how it arises. And once we see how it arises, we are no longer its prisoner. So we can then go, okay, I know who you are. And I remember that we had a disagreement in the past, but we're not obligated to immediately react in a bad way because we have the freedom from reflexive reactivity, from this reflexive emotionality that makes our life so difficult. So that would be my answer. That's the fruit of vipassana. That's why vipassana leads to wisdom, because it cuts through the recognitive loop that traps us in samsara.
Thank you so much, Dr. Richard Dixey. And I think with that, we can conclude today's lecture. Thank you so much. And really appreciate your wonderful presentation and also your responses to the questions of our audience. I hope our audience will be more benefited later when they watch this video, whenever they are free. So with that, we conclude today's guest lecture, and we look forward to meeting you with more interesting topics like this in the
And
coming
by
days.
all means, if any of you have any questions that you want to ask, just drop an email to the
Yes.
contact us at Dharma College and I'll answer them. So it'd
Yeah.
be my pleasure.
I also would like to again remind that Dharma College in Berkeley offers quite a number of interesting classes. I hope you all will be benefited. Dr. Dixie, if you could leave the email or the website here, I think that will be very helpful.
I've got the website on the last slide, don't worry.
All right. Okay. Okay. All right. So thank you again. And I would like to invoke blessings upon Dr. Richard Dixie for kindly accepting our invitation for this, insightful speech. May you always be well, happy, healthy, dear Dr. Richard Dixie. Let's also keep our palms together close to our heart and pray that by the power of the Dana Sila Bhavana activities that we all have performed during our lifetime and during our whole course of samsara, may they all become one united power, and may it be shared with all the celestial beings. May all the wonderful celestial beings, including respectful Brahmas and Devas, and all sentient beings, receive this merit and share this merit and be well, happy, healthy wherever they are. May all your departed ones also receive this merit, be well, happy, healthy, safe wherever they are. May all of us be able to live our life peacefully, comfortably with good health. May all of us and all sentient beings be also attain the supreme bliss of Nibbana, the ultimate, the absolute peace and happiness at the end of our suffering. Thus, please keep your palms together close to your heart and say 3 times, Sadhu, Sadhu, Sadhu. Okay, see you again next week at the same time. Good night and bless you all.